Why, hello there, and welcome back to my channel if you're one of my returning subscribers. I have a fun project for you today, but I also want to take a chance to welcome everybody that's new that has found me during the cozy event put on by Costube. Thanks for showing up. I hope you enjoyed this video as well. Today we are going to be prepping for those cold winter months that are coming up here in the very near future. For me being in Colorado, it's a little more near than some of the other places in the country. So we are going to make a 16th century muff. One of my favorite time periods to reproduce with my historical costuming is going to be 16th century Italy. I really love the entire time period as far as the clothing and the intricacies of social change, politics, how that affects fashion. That's seriously one of the major geeks and passions of my life. But today we are going to make a muff. The muffs that we actually think about from the Victorian period, like the first time I ever think I saw a muff in pop culture would have been in a Muppet Christmas Carol, probably back when I was a kid. But the muff actually goes back all the way to the 16th century. I'm going to link below my blog post about that I did a couple years ago with the different origins and kind of how it spread during the 16th century to different regions. And again, this is going to be among the more social elites because that's what I was able to find documentation for. But why don't we go and take a look at the materials we need to get this muff started? What do you say? We've got a selection of gold trims and cording. I've got more of the Japanese gold couching thread that I used in my hairnet project. Some narrow trim and some wider machine-made bobbin net in a metallic pattern. They were doing metallic bobbin laces like this in the 16th century. You'll see some examples of that in the German Museum on some of their historical pieces. So this is what we're going to use to trim everything with, as well as buttons, but I need to go pick those out. Next thing we need to have the fur talk, apparently. And love me or hate me about it. What I have come down to for myself is that there's just not a good answer when it comes to historical costuming and fur. I don't use it a lot because of that, but so trade off on one end if you're using furs for your historical costumes, because they absolutely did to keep warm. With synthetics, even the nice high-end synthetics with knit backing like this one, they're still plastic, and you run the risk of getting all of these little micro plastics essentially back into your environment, into your food, into everything when you're using fake fur. So that's something to keep in mind. The process of making fibers that are this fine, that have the hand that we want to really fake that fur convincingly, it creates a lot of waste and a lot of pollution. On the other hand, if you're using real fur, depending on the animal, it may be endangered. There's also people that have ethical questions about raising animals for using their furs. My personal stance on it is if the animal's being used in its entirety and it's not endangered, or if I'm recycling vintage fur, I'm alright with it. This is a piece of faux lynx, basically. I'm not going to go out and start hunting down lynx pelts. That's not necessary. No one's eating lynx, really. But it was something they used quite a bit in some of the higher end fashions, because this stuff did get controlled by some of the sumptuary laws depending on where you lived. In England, the furs were very tightly controlled during the 16th century as to what you could and couldn't wear. That is a whole other research rabbit hole to fall down, which we're not going to really get into, but because I am using fur, I wanted to address some of those things. I don't really know if there's a good answer at this point, but this is the choice I am making. This is my informed choice that I am making, and it's not even a new piece of faux fur that I'm using. This is actually a scrap from a different project, so I'm trying to get as much use out of this piece as I possibly could for my, not only for my investment in it, but to keep some stuff out of the landfills. Next up, we're going to use a scrap of burgundy cotton velvet, which is now covered in clippings from that faux fur. And that's because it's got a very similar drape to some of the denser, more period velvets. So we're going to use that. This is left over from another project. The entire muff is actually a really good stash buster project. And now my secret to actually making that muff fluffy and keeping your hands extra warm, I'm gonna put probably 3 layers of cotton batting inside. Just cut it to size and insert it, and that's going to help give the muff some body. It also acts as extra insulation when it is super cold. So definitely go and get some batting. There is a 16th century muff in the Boston Museum. I'll try and find it and link it below in the description. But that's where I got the idea to do this. It's a huge muff from the late 16th century, early 17th century. And in the description it talks about wadding, which is basically what we're going to use this for. But with all of that said, I'm going to go check my phone that's going off in the background, and let's get to work on some construction.
My first step, once I had all of my materials prepped and ready, is going to be cutting out a rectangle from my cotton velveteen. That's really going to be the basis I use for the whole pattern, because I don't feel it's necessary to cut one rectangle as my pattern. It's pretty easy to just mark that out on the respective layers that we're going to be using. My rectangle, after everything is said and done, comes out to 13 inches by 22 inches, but you can adjust this to be pretty much any size that you think is going to be helpful for you, or that you want to use and have materials for. To keep this up with a one-day make sort of inspiration, we are going to sew this primarily on the sewing machine, which means we're going to be cutting out all of these strips of trim, applying them with some pins, and then spending some quality time on my machine. In retrospect, it probably would have been the best practice to go back in here and iron that velvet against a towel, you know, just to kind of get some of those wrinkles that you see in there out. But they do start to fluff out, and they aren't noticeable on the finished garment as much, just because of the batting fluffing out and starting to work on the cotton fibers themselves. I'm going to advise just take an extra few minutes while you're going through this process, and definitely measure out your trim, make sure you've got the right amounts, as well as taking the extra time to keep everything running parallel if you're doing something in this style. There are other embroidery examples you could go to that are a little more organic and less linear. But when you're doing a linear pattern like this, while the application is easy, you do have more obvious places where it's going to be messed up if your trim is not sitting parallel and evenly spaced out. Now, just take a little extra time. Those extra measurements are worth it, And with velveteen, it's not as likely to crawl as much as if you're using a high pile velvet. Just a quick tip to sew your metallic laces while you're sewing them on the sewing machine. Take your time. I super sped this clip up for you just for the sake of getting through the footage, but the faster you're going, the more likely you are to catch one of those delicate little loops of your metallic laces on a presser foot or on a feed dog, something awful, and start ripping it or stretching it out in weird ways. So just take your time, it's going to be fine. Once you've applied any trims and decorations to your fashion fabric, I would come back and trace that pattern onto your fur. If you're using real fur, you may need to piece it in some ways, and that's going to be a subject for a whole different video. We are just going to treat this as a lay it down with the nappy side down as you're tracing. That way you can trace in on top of something that's a little bit easier to mark. And then start pinning together the sides, because we're going to be able to pin into the knit of a synthetic fur and not damage it like you would if you're using an actual hide from an animal. If you've been really enjoying this content, I'm going to take a second and remind you to go ahead and click that like button down there at the bottom. It's going to help share out my content to other people who might be interested in getting some help with their Renaissance costuming or other historical costuming adventures. You can also click subscribe if you'd like to watch more videos like this and see what new projects I'm up to. And the notification bell will let you know when I post things, just in case something's going on with the algorithm and you're not getting those notifications when some new content comes out. One thing I'm going to pay extra attention to is going through and pinning all four sides of this muff together. I'm not going to sew all four sides. I'm going to leave one of the short ends open for me to insert some batting and flip the muff right side out after I'm done sewing on my sewing machine. But I also want to make sure that everything is staying perfectly lined up. I'd hate for the sewing machine to pull something out of whack. If you remember how I was talking about the synthetic furs made on a knit, you're basically sewing a t-shirt to a pair of blue jeans when you're making this portion of your muff. So take the extra time, because the sewing machine feed dogs can easily pull something out of whack, or take a little extra time and sew it by hand. It really won't take all that long if you want to do it that way. I was just trying to get this done pretty quickly. After sewing my muff together on 3 sides and flipping it right sides back out, I'm going to cut out my batting inserts the same way I was cutting out the fur just a little while ago. And I'm going to put these in here. If you want to, you definitely could go and quilt or pad stitch that batting layer together. I haven't found it to be super necessary, but if you're doing a lot of activity or you expect to be doing a lot of stuff to your muff, it might help stabilize the batting inside and keep it from bunching up on one end or the other. When I'm sewing this end shut, I'm also going to be trying to grab a little bit of the batting with those stitches as I go in and out, which should keep at least one end of that really secured into the seam I sew. Now I'm just trying to tuck my raw edges in together. I'm pinning and I'm going to be sewing in between those folds, kind of doing a hand sewn stitch in the ditch situation. And I'm going to start training that batting to roll the way I'm going to want it to roll. After closing everything up and getting a solid piece of my muff together, I'm going to place my buttons. These are just some metal buttons I picked up at the local fabric store. I got 6 of them, and they kind of look Renaissance-ish. I have some reproduction buttons, but they don't really go with what we're trying to do right now. And I'm going to mark those out, and we're just going to stitch them directly into the velvet, as well as any seam allowance and probably that first layer of batting. I don't need to go all the way down into the fur and back in and out. It just isn't necessary. All we're looking to do is keep the button from falling off. The last step that I had for completing my muff was going to be making some button loops. I'm just going to do some quick handmade braid to quickly loop around this. It's a 1 strand, almost like a finger crochet. And I can do this super quickly. I can keep pretty even tension because I've had some practice with it. And all I'm looking to do is to have something long enough to go around those buttons and secure the 2 ends of the muff together. In the 16th century, it doesn't look like they were often sewn together from the woodcuts I've seen. That doesn't mean it's completely impossible, but they were. I enjoy keeping it as one flat piece of fabric that I then button together, just as a nod to the woodcuts I've seen from 16th century Venice with these little fur-lined muffs. Just another quick reminder about working with metal threads. You don't want to make your stitches overly tight with these because it can cause the metal threads to snap. It is just a little bit of metal wrapped around, in this case, a cotton core, and that keeps it flexible to an extent, but you can still snap them if you're too rough on them, or unwind it from the cotton core that you have. You'll also want to use a large-eyed needle to be able to plunge the ends back down into the fabric. That way the metal threads aren't trying to fray out. And I've already finished off all of my raw edges at this point, so the only way I have to hide those raw strings from my metal threads is to plunge them down into the garment. Pull it out the other side and snip it off.
And just like that, I have a completed muff. I love the little buttonhole detailing that we have on the 16th century versions of these. It makes it kind of versatile. I can use it as a lap blanket if I really want to. But it's also just a fun little extra bit of decoration for them. It's a little bit too warm for me to wear anything that would make sense to wear this with, to go out and model it for all of you. But maybe we'll do that later this winter. In the meantime, I thank all of you for watching. Thank you very much for joining us for Cozy. Cozy is the costube community's online convention that we're hosting for all of you through YouTube. It's completely free. And we've got a ton of content coming out this weekend. Definitely check out the links in my description for more information, links to the social media programming that we have going on, as well as after the fact, I'm going to link a master list that one of our folks is putting together with everybody's videos. In the meantime, I hope you all have a fantastic day, and thank you so much for watching. Have a great day. Bye.